Welcome to the Spoiler Alert Food Safety video tutorial series. After you've launched Spoiler Alert, you can create a new store by tapping the plus button in the upper right corner of the store's table view. That will bring up the new store dialog. From here, you can enter the information required to create a store. The first thing you'll need is a store number. And this again can be anything that you would want it to be. It doesn't have to be a particular format of letters or numbers. So if you have store numbers for multiple stores, you can simply type in your store number. Store name is something that maybe makes a little more sense to your location. If you have multiple stores, oftentimes the location of the city that the store is in could be used, or whatever you like. The renewal field is basically just pointing out your subscription. Each store requires a subscription, a monthly auto-renewing subscription of $10. This field would tell you when your next renewal date would be coming up. Each store does require password security, so you need to come up with a secure password that only you, the owner, will know. This is a field that you will not share with your employees. However, you might want to share it with your managers if you want them to be able to do some of the owner level tasks, which we'll get into in a separate video. You need to enter it twice for confirmation to make sure that you haven't made any typos. The next field would be the last label number before starting over. And that basically is telling you how many label numbers do you want to use before you roll that number over. In this case, it defaults to 1,000 labels. So in 1,000 labels, it will roll back over to label 1. It will never reuse a label that has not been expired or marked as sold or wasted. It will skip that number and continue on, but the upper limit will always be whatever you set here. That way, you don't fill up your iCloud account with labels that are years old that you don't really need. The next field is the seconds before returning to the main screen. That is defaulting to 300 seconds or 5 minutes. This is involved with the employee going in to print labels or do other activities, scan labels to mark them as sold. In case they leave the iPad on those screens, this 300-second timer will kick them back to the main screen after that many seconds. That way, the next employee coming along will be forced to sign in again, rather than just reusing some employee that was there ahead of him. It will help ensure that the proper employee's ID is attached with each of the transactions, printing, marking as sold, that sort of thing. You also have the option to use the 24-hour clock in the next setting. That's up to you if you want military time. The days to retain the labels after they are expired or closed is 7. This has to do with the purge, which we'll cover in a separate video, as well as the date to use for purging old labels. Whether we're going to use the date it was closed, which would be the date that they marked it as sold or wasted, the employees, or the date that they expired. In case you are not marking your labels as sold, you merely wish to print them and then wash them off and not track them beyond that, then it would use the date that they expired. Next option is whether or not you wanted to track the waste. I highly recommend you do. It will give you some valuable information, but if you don't, you can turn that off here. If you do track waste, then waste will be an option for the employees. When they go to mark the label as sold, they could also mark it as waste, and if they do, additional information will be required if this is turned on, such as how much waste, reason for the waste, that sort of thing, which we'll cover in a separate video. The hours prior to expiration to send the alert. Alerts go out as food becomes at its end of life or at the end of its status, and a alert goes out at that moment. If you want it to go out prior to the expiration, you can tell it to do that here, and it only will give you hours. So you could go from 1 hour before it's going to expire to as many as you want. And lastly, the alert message. This is the alert that will appear when the alert comes up on the iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch. You can customize what that alert message says in addition to the boilerplate text, which gives you the store, the label, and the product. Once you have all of these options set up, you merely tap the Save button in the upper right-hand corner, and the store is saved. Hit Done, and you're out of the edit mode. And that's it for creating a new store.